So it's okay to do surrogacy in those 3 countries.
If you're straight.
What if the parent that is put on the birth certificate passes away?
Right.
Then what happens to the child?
Yeah, exactly. So the child would become a ward of the state.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Who's Your Daddy podcast, where it's our job to explore and discover all things non-traditional paths to parenthood. That includes surrogacy, adoption, foster to adopt, and more. And today we are going to be discussing where in the world can you do surrogacy? Where are the best places and worst places in the world to do surrogacy?
And we're also going to touch on something that's happening in Europe right now that's affecting specifically LGBTQ Italians and their ability to even have a family. So that is going to be kind of an interesting topic to discuss. We have an interview coming up later in the episode, so don't miss that.
In more recent years, we've seen this far-right conservative movement, nationalistic movement hit through Europe, hit through the US. We've seen a lot of changes with it, laws specifically, and how that's affected the LGBTQ plus community. And now we're going to be kind of
incredibly disproportionately.
Right?
Yeah.
And now we're going to be zeroing in on some things that have really hit the news lately and kind of how that is like legitimately affecting a lot of us.
And we're going to talk to a couple that it is affecting right now. So that's going to be very interesting to hear their perspective, I think.
Yeah.
But first, let's jump into where can you do surrogacy? Where's the best place to do it? A lot of people will probably realize that people come to the United States to do surrogacy, and there's definitely a reason for that.
Yeah, well, why do so many people come to the U.S. to do surrogacy?
Well, a lot of countries...
Because I've heard, you can do surrogacy in other countries. You can do surrogacy in other places around the world. But why the U.S.?
The U.S. doesn't have any federal laws that specifically address surrogacy, but because we're broken down into a state system, each state can kind of have their own laws or statutes regarding surrogacy. So even though the U.S. doesn't have anything federally, every state usually has something on the books, or if it's not on the books, it's just assumed that you can do it because it's not technically illegal. But there are a lot of states in the U.S. that have pretty good surrogacy laws that they've passed, some very recently. So yeah, let's jump into a little bit of that because there are good and bad states in the U.S. as well. And then we'll talk a little bit about international.
I do have a follow-up question just to clarify.
Yeah.
Because I'm thinking, there's a lot of countries around the world that don't have any policies or laws around surrogacy as well. It's just not defined. So that's similar to the U.S. because federally we don't have laws in place to regulate surrogacy. However, you said the state system, we have our own more local statewide laws that occur and differs from state to state. However, are there protections in place within these states that protect intended parents, protect surrogates? What makes it different from,
another country?
Another country.
The way that I understand it is in the US, states have a lot of power, right? So we're it's sort of the state experiment. So we're a bunch of little countries that are sort of under this umbrella of a bigger country, right? And if there is a federal law,
which is why they call it the United States.
Correct.
Oh my God.
So if there is a federal law, it supersedes state law.
Right. Okay.
But states are sort of allowed to do their own thing to a certain extent as long as they're not outside of the federal law. So if there's no federal law banning surrogacy, states can kind of make whatever law they want regarding surrogacy. However, in some countries, the country itself has a federal law that says surrogacy is not allowed. Compensated surrogacy is not allowed.
And then there's a lot of countries that don't say anything.
Right. But then they also don't have any protections in place. So the difference is even if, United States as a whole doesn't have these laws in place, but the states themselves do, which is different than a country that just is we don't really care, but there's also no protections. There's no laws that define what a donor is, what a donor's rights are, what a surrogate's rights are, what the intended parent's rights are.
So say I'm a person who wants to have a baby in, let's say, I don't know, Thailand, for example. Thailand doesn't have any specific laws on
Not
surrogacy.
that I know of.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll just say hypothetically, Thailand doesn't have any specific laws regarding surrogacy. I want to go to Thailand and have my baby there. So I find a gestational carrier and we're doing the thing in Thailand. Is there a possibility that like issues could come up legally?
Like a million times. Yes.
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
So I mean, like, if there's no, I'm not sure if it's expressly outlawed in Thailand, but like, there's no laws in place to know what to do. So like, when you're at the hospital and this woman is having a baby, there's no way to explain like what's happening based on their law. So like, there's no way for you to become a legal parent in Thailand. Does that make sense?
Right. And
So
and
if you
for
took that
you,
baby,
my husband, to be the other legal parent.
yeah.
Of
So if
that
you took
child.
that baby home, you would probably be like accused of kidnapping. I mean, like, I think that's kind of what happens
Wow.
if you can't establish parentage in a country, and then you take a child from somebody who gave birth to that child. Then even if you're genetically tied, I'm not entirely sure like if there's no laws that like help you navigate that system, then there's something in the law that could probably find you
Thank you for
culpable.
going on this journey with me. I wanted to kind of like bring this up and make this point because I'm kind of legally dumb in the
It's all
sense that
good.
I know very little about legal stuff. And a lot of the times when legality is mentioned, I just want to turn it off immediately because it kind of scares me. But like, making that jump from, hey, these are the laws to, oh, this is actually how it can affect you out in the real world. That is a really big point, and I'm glad that you helped make that because that to me makes more sense to be like, oh, like reality, logistically, this is what can happen if these protections aren't put in place.
Yeah, I've never ran that scenario in Thailand in my like through Google or like research, but my guess is that's
Right.
sort
We're
of
just
what would
a
happen.
hypothetical situation.
Yes. So the US is the only country that has solidly defined laws that protect both surrogates and intended parents from potential legal challenges. Therefore, the United States is the best choice for international intended parents as well. Even though we don't have any national surrogacy laws, each state has their own regarding surrogacy. Some are favorable, some are unfavorable.
Right.
Interestingly enough, I ran across this little tidbit of knowledge, which is Kenya, Malaysia, Nigeria don't have formal laws, but surrogacy is permissible.
So
However,
it's okay to do surrogacy in those three countries.
if you're straight,
right. Yeah, because we know that LGBTQ
you're-
people are heavily discriminated against in those countries.
yeah, I'm pretty sure like sodomy is punishable by death, and at least one of these, I didn't jump into all of their anti-LGBTQ legislation, but none of these are LGBTQ affirming countries, so does not apply to potentially the audience listening to this. Another little tidbit of information that I thought was interesting is Colombia allows commercial surrogacy. The practice is recognized by the Constitutional Court, but there are few regulations. A lawmaker in Colombia is proposing a bill that would safeguard surrogates, protective parents, and children, but I don't know that that's passed yet. I didn't figure out the exact date on that. But I know that there is a couple who did surrogacy in Colombia, and they're trying to help a bunch of people
Yeah.
do surrogacy in Colombia. So that could potentially
They're not the
be
only couple. I've heard a lot of good things about doing surrogacy in Colombia, and
Yeah.
I think it's one of the up and coming countries that is really kind of like figuring it out.
yeah, it's super
So,
interesting.
I mean, that's kind of an interesting point. I've heard a lot of people going to Mexico also to do surrogacy.
I have heard about, I need to look a little bit more into that, but that didn't come up as like you could go to Mexico pretty easily and do surrogacy.
Mm-hmm.
My guess is that, again, there's probably not like a national law that helps or defines how that legal process plays out, which so much of this, unfortunately, ends up being a legal process because you're dealing
Yeah.
with parental rights, compensations, payments. I mean, just
That's kind of the scary
Insurances.
thing, though, when you're thinking about doing this in another country, the
oh my
possibility
God, yeah.
of your right to being a parent of your child not being respected or granted, and therefore losing access to your baby that you now have like spent years and years in the making of like of growing your family.
Well, there was just a straight couple that made national news that had a child via IVF and surrogacy in Mexico.
Oh, I remember this
and the
story.
dad had to, I don't know why the mom couldn't go, but for whatever reason, the dad spent like 1 or 2 or 3, how many months? I can't remember. Up to like, I feel like it was maybe 3 months in Mexico trying to get all the paperwork together
so that they could like adopt their own son.
so that they could take their son out of the country, like take the
oh,
child home. You know what I mean? And so like
wow.
the mom like didn't get to meet her child. I think they got to see him or her in the hospital, but then they weren't able to take them home until like they were like 2 or 3 months old, I think. So even that's just a straight couple that's trying to like, have a kid through surrogacy and do it in Mexico. And so that's why I think like, yes, you can do it, but I think it's also just sort of tenuous.
I mean, yeah, it makes sense why the U.S. is such a popular destination to do surrogacy, and then if there are protections at the state level to like protect intended parents, the surrogate and the child.
Georgia has also been a popular destination for
country, not the state.
Fertility tourism. Correct, the country. Commercial surrogacy is legal for heterosexual couples, but not gay couples. So that's one thing, is you can go to Georgia if you're straight, but not if you're gay. Ukraine used to be kind of a hub for surrogacy, but obviously not anymore.
Right.
And then Russia used to be somewhat of a hub for surrogacy, but
they've outlawed anyone outside of Russia to do surrogacy in Russia.
As of December 2022, from what I read.
So it's all internal. But again, like same-sex marriage, all that is not legal in Russia. There's no LGBTQ plus rights. There's huge discrimination. It's dangerous to be gay in Russia. Bad. So like it's not even a possibility for LGBTQ plus people to go to Russia and do surrogacy.
Which again, when you look something up as a gay person, you always have to add the caveat, but what if I'm gay? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it's like, oh, people do surrogacy in Georgia. Oh, but just straight couples. You know what I mean? It's like you always have to, or Kenya or Malaysia or whatever. It's
which is part of the difficulty in looking up this information, because when you were looking this stuff up, you got a lot of information specific for heterosexual couples, but you weren't, you had to do a little bit more digging to find like, oh.
Well, yeah, a website can be like, oh, Kenya, Malaysia, and Nigeria allow it. It's permissible. But then you're like, but I'm gay. So probably
not permissible.
Yeah, it's like, so unless I like put on a front and I like pretended to be straight, and then I could go like through surrogacy in one of those countries. But man, that's so far away. Like not I guess for us it's very far away.
Oh, yeah.
Obviously not everybody in the world
is
doing surrogacy from the United States.
I mean, and that's that goes without saying that when we're talking about this, not only is it applicable to those in the U.S., but we're speaking to everybody outside the U.S. as well, because surrogacy happens all over the world.
Yeah,
and so we can talk about
Nigeria might be a lot closer for somebody who's in Spain or something like that. But you know what I mean?
It's still not possible to go and do that if you're LGBTQ.
If they're straight.
If they're straight. So that's where surrogacy is legal. What about the places where it's, I don't know, is there an in-between between legal and illegal?
I mean, yes. So Canada, Denmark, New Zealand, Brazil, Britain, and Australia allow some forms of altruistic surrogacy, but for-profit surrogacy is banned.
So it's kind of like restricted, regulated.
I think it's regulated anywhere that allows it to a certain extent. But in these cases, there's no like in the US, you typically have a base compensation on top of other fees that are incurred that just can't be the surrogate's responsibility. That's the intended parent's responsibility. In those countries, the base compensation is an illegal act of payment, essentially. So
in these restricted countries, it's commercialized surrogacy is illegal. Altruistic surrogacy is legal.
Yeah. So altruistic essentially meaning like, I will carry your child. I will volunteer to implant the embryos that you've created so that, we can make a child and bring a child into the world. But the only thing that you can pay for is like the medical fees, the transportation fees, hotel I mean, that sort of stuff.
Right.
So any fees that are incurred, but there's
no payment. Yeah.
there's no payment in the US. There's sort of like a pain and suffering, which sounds really bad, but like it's uncomfortable, I guess.
Hormone injections are
obviously.
uncomfortable.
Like it's uncomfortable,
It's
right?
uncomfortable to go through
Like
a
pain and
transfer of an
suffering
embryo.
sounds real. Like
Yeah.
I guess we're gonna So that's painful, potentially suffering. Obviously you're putting somebody's body through a bunch of different stuff. So
Yeah, it's
there's
not
no
necessarily
compensation for pain and suffering in those countries. I know some people mentioned Canada. We looked into it like briefly. That would be amazing.
Oh yeah, it would be.
To like have a surrogate in Canada who was like just wanting to do it altruistically. Like I think that's amazing. I know when we were talking to some people when we were in Australia, they said that it was super difficult, like very unattainable to do in Australia. So I think that there might be something beyond just having to find somebody doing it altruistically. There might be something deeper there. I didn't look into it that far.
Well, I think it's also you have to look at it with supply and demand too, because if you're looking at the idea of altruistic surrogacy, that's going to be.
I can't even imagine how long you'd have to wait for. You know what I mean?
But you can imagine like how much cheaper and more affordable that would be for intended parents to be able to have a surrogate that they're not paying a fee.
I'm still open to like signing up with somebody in Canada and just getting our name out there, and then maybe somebody just being like, hey, like I'll do it.
I've also heard that it can take several years, 2-3 years or more to sit on a list in Canada in order to get an altruistic surrogate. Because if you have, I mean, that's one of the big draws of the US too for surrogacy is a lot of people in the US do surrogacy, or they're more tempted to do surrogacy because there's at least that incentive, that payment, to be able to make an income through doing surrogacy.
Well, it's work. I mean, I think
it's a lot of work.
I mean, I think that the argument that
it's the paperwork, the legal work, the appointments, like there's so much that goes into it.
Yeah,
time,
I mean,
emotional investment, all of it.
It's 9 months of someone's time and energy to like create a child. So, I mean, it makes sense. Obviously, I think anything that deals with money can end up with twists and turns that aren't great. But overall, I understand the like for-profit commercial surrogacy like model. Like,
and then there's a whole argument against it.
Oh,
we'll get into that when we talk about Italy, I think.
Okay, let's talk about where it is illegal. Cambodia, Denmark, France, Germany, Ireland, Italy, Spain, Portugal, Bulgaria, and Nepal. All illegal. No bueno, no altruistic, no commercial surrogacy.
They have laws that state you cannot be a surrogate.
Yes.
And then with that, I find it so surprising to me that like most of Europe it's not possible to do surrogacy in most of Europe.
It's very interesting.
It is, yeah. But I think again, it's that commercialized versus altruistic surrogacy.
Well, you actually know what the other part of it is?
What?
It's when we were talking to somebody, or when somebody was talking to us about going to Canada, or we were looking it up or something. In the US, the insurance company, the insurance policy, our health insurance system in general is just like completely bonkers and doesn't make any sense.
Right. We know that.
And so a surrogate that has health insurance will not be covered if they are carrying somebody else's child, unless their health insurance has a very specific surrogacy rider built into it that says like your pregnancy will be covered if you are a surrogate. But that is like pretty rare.
Yeah.
So typically intended parents have to buy a separate insurance policy. The surrogate has her own insurance policy for her health. We have insurance that we have for ourselves, but then just for the pregnancy, the 9 months, there has to be a third insurance policy that's just covering the pregnancy and the birth.
Oh my goodness.
But in those other countries, a lot of countries in Europe, pretty much all the countries in Europe that I can think of, Canada, Australia.
Well, Canada's not in Europe, but I get what you're saying.
No, but they all have universal health care.
Right.
So the government is essentially footing the bill, which by like government, it's just like, everybody's paying into the healthcare system. But the government is paying for that pregnancy as well. So if surrogacy is allowed, if compensated surrogacy is allowed, those countries would become, I think, like big havens.
Oh my God.
For surrogacy,
yeah,
because US, I feel like a lot of people in the US would be going there
Of course.
to go through surrogacy because they wouldn't have to purchase this extra health insurance policy that can be anywhere from like, I've read like 5,000 to like 30,000. Like it's, I'm still not sure why
Right.
that figure is so bizarre, but I think that's
Good amounts
part
of
of it.
tons and tons of money that the government would be paying for regarding healthcare for surrogacy.
Yeah, potentially.
Yeah.
So I think that could be part of it. Maybe somebody can fact check me on it, but
It's a good
It's
point to
just
make.
like-
I actually don't know.
we're just like big. Which is the U.S. is just a big capitalistic society. So like, if insurance companies can make money off of people going through surrogacy in the United States, like the U.S. is gonna be like, okay, sure.
It's another statement for the wild, wild west. It's the
Yeah.
wild, wild west. Why it is the wild, wild west out here? I don't know why that's so hard for me to say.
I don't know, but so the U.S. being the kind of like favorite place for people to do surrogacy because of laws and protections. There are good places and bad places in the U.S. to do surrogacy. The best place, hands down, in the U.S. to do surrogacy is California. Bar none, California. They have the most laws that specify the roles of donors, intended parents, gestational carriers, etc.
State laws, protections.
Yeah,
Yeah.
pre-birth orders, names on birth certificates, like legal documentation of like how this process works.
Runs so smoothly.
California knows
Little
what
to
they're
no
doing.
issues. That's great.
The one problem is when you are the best at something, you're usually the most expensive place to do it.
Yeah.
So, this is the best car in the world. That would be great for me to have, but it's probably going to be really expensive. This is the best place to do this process, but it's probably kind of expensive. They have like the best IVF clinics, the best laws for surrogacy. So if that's affordable for somebody, and if money is not necessarily an issue, that's the place to do it. California knows what they're doing, but there are other states that are also very like surrogacy friendly. So DC, Idaho, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, Washington, New Jersey, Vermont, Nevada, Connecticut, Delaware, Maine.
So I am surprised to see Idaho on the list.
Yeah.
I have to say. I mean, DC, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, Washington, that all makes sense. I also am surprised not to see Oregon on this list, but let's talk about Idaho. Why Idaho?
Yeah. So Idaho is kind of somebody was saying that Idaho is like a big mecca for surrogacy. We actually have friends that did surrogacy in Idaho, but the laws 2 years ago were not the laws that they have now. So this was literally as of like a couple months ago. I think it was June 2023.
Oh my.
Idaho just passed a protective surrogacy law. So the law provides a simplified process similar to that in Utah, where the intended parents or parents enter into agreement prior to attempting a pregnancy. The legal agreement must be submitted to an Idaho court for verification that it meets the requirements of the law. Then immediately after birth of the child, notice is filed to the court of birth and an order is issued permitting the intended parents to be legally recognized as the child's parents.
So summarizing that in terms that we can all understand. What?
So Idaho had made it kind of difficult, I think specifically for same-sex couples, to be on the birth certificate, or non-genetically tied parents to be on a birth certificate. They didn't have any laws that kind of like outlined that process, again, like California has. And so sometimes I think then it just gets thrown up to a judge or a court and they get to decide, which is the kind of a weird thing. It's like in some of these places, in some of the places like in Oregon, and like
It's like gambling with your parental rights.
it ends up being up to a judge sort of like pre-birth orders or adoption stuff. You just have, if you don't have these laws in place, sometimes it can be a long process. Our friends were kind of part of like making this push forward because they had kind of a difficult time doing the adoption process after the child was born. So
basically what ends up happening is the child will be born. One of the parents, intended parents, is put on the birth certificate, but the other parent is not.
No, the surrogate mother is.
The surrogate mother.
And
So the one that's not even genetically related.
And then you have to go through, so gestational carrier, right?
Gestational
so she
carrier.
is like, no.
But she carried the baby, of course.
But she carried the baby, so she gets put on the birth certificate as mom.
Right. Okay. And then
But she has no intention of being mother.
Yes.
And even though there's a bunch of documents that they've signed, supposedly with lawyers and legal documents that like this person still gets put on the birth certificate because
There's no
they don't know how
overarching
to.
law that like clarifies that.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
Yeah. So I think they had to go to Florida or something to like
What?
do adoption things, and then they were able to both be on the birth certificate. I don't know, super weird. But
Dang.
yeah, if the state, that's the thing, if the state doesn't have it written somewhere and outline the process, then judges and lawyers have to decide what the best process is, or like what's legally feasible.
So my question is, why is it so important for both intended parents to be put on the birth certificate? Like, why does it matter so much?
I mean, I think just like from a personal perspective, right? Like,
Well, yeah.
that person carrying the child is not the mother, right? Like, they have no genetic tie. They have no interest in legally bound to this child. So I think there's that perspective of it. It's also a legal document of identification, right? So like sometimes for different jobs or different, I mean, passport applications, right? Or you have to show your birth certificate. And that birth certificate should have your parents, the people who are raising you, on it.
Yeah.
So one, that's important. But secondly, depending on the pre-birth order, if you are able to get one of those, or if you're not, sometimes even if you're on the birth certificate, you have to do what's called a second parent adoption. So if you're not the genetic tie of that child. So this is kind of, for gay and lesbian couples more specifically, right? So
Yeah.
typically we can only have one of us genetically tied to this child. The other one would have to do something called like a second parent adoption. I think in Idaho, this law takes care of both of those things, like so that you don't have to do the second parent adoption, because that can cost thousands of dollars and it can be just a timely, like lengthy process. So in some states with these laws, they're adding legal ties just, on top of the fact that you're on the birth certificate. So I think there's two caveats. I think you have to know, one, am I on the birth certificate? And two, was that legally binding, or am I just on the birth certificate, but there wasn't enough paperwork in the background that I have to do a second parent adoption? It's that's how I understand it. It's very murky, because I think some people,
that sounds murky.
I've heard stories of people being on the birth certificate, but they also then had to do a second parent adoption.
Well, either way, like, say you're not able to be put on the birth certificate because there's no laws that have that protection, and the judge just decides, nope, not happening. So you're not put on the birth certificate. One of the parents is, and then the surrogate mother is. Like, what about things like, what if the parent that is put on the birth certificate passes away?
Right.
Then what happens to the child?
Yeah, exactly. So the child would become a ward of the state, because that other person is not. Again, even if, like I said, even if their name is on the birth certificate, but there's not enough legal background with the birth certificate, sometimes you also need that second parent adoption to then assume the parental rights of that child.
I'm just thinking of like, consents at the hospital. What if the child's hospitalized and one of the parents needs to go visit the child?
Right.
Things like that. So
right. So then you would also like need permission.
Wow.
From the other parent to do a bunch of different things for
that
the
could
child.
Be problematic.
Like make decisions.
Yeah.
Sign off on things. Make medical decisions.
My God.
All of that.
Okay, yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah. So those are the best states. There are bad places, and then there are sort of like meh places. There's a bunch of meh places, but I'm just going to list the bad ones. So if you're going through surrogacy, don't go here. Okay? So Arizona, Indiana, Tennessee, Virginia, and Wyoming. The surrogacy laws in these states are unclear. There may be significant variations in the outcome of surrogacy contracts. So essentially, these states have nothing written down. Everything's left up to a judge. No pre-birth order guarantee. No second parent adoption guarantee.
So it just could be really messy,
it's
uncomfortable.
Just whatever happens
fun.
In court happens, and somebody has to make a decision, and there's no legal protections for you. And then the absolute worst places, worst. These explicitly prohibit surrogacy. Louisiana, Michigan, and Nebraska. So they say it's illegal. So they have something written.
Okay.
It's not that they don't have anything written. It's that they have something written that says it's illegal. So
Dang.
Don't go there. That might have changed Somebody said like Michigan's the only one left. So maybe Louisiana and Nebraska changed something, but I did not read anything recently.
But still not super friendly.
Yeah, not super friendly.
Not there yet.
Not that I would, not somewhere that I would go. So if you're like a surrogate and you're like, I'll be your surrogate, or you're like finding some intended parents and you really want to be a surrogate, but you're from Michigan, like, sorry, no one, they like can't choose you. It's illegal there. The remaining states, the ones that we didn't mention, so the good, the bad, and then the really bad.
And this includes Oregon, our home state where we live.
Yeah, this includes Oregon. They don't have legislation outlawing surrogacy, and gestational surrogacy is typically allowed by statute. Depending on your state and your circumstance, this may be done through pre-birth order, a full adoption, a step-parent adoption, or a second parent adoption to ensure both partners are legal parents of the child. So that's where, like, Oregon doesn't have anything specific, so we might be able to do a pre-birth order. Depends on the judge, depends on how legally binding that ends up being. If not, we might have to do a second parent adoption afterwards, just sort of depending. Oregon is very like lenient in most of these cases. So even though it doesn't clearly dictate when pre-birth parentage orders will or won't be granted, it's usually up to a judge. Usually judges in Oregon, you're going to be in a metro area and they're probably going to be somewhat liberal leaning on these things, and they're going to understand the process of surrogacy, because I think surrogacy is done quite a bit in Oregon. Typically, a pre-birth order is accepted when at least one of the intended parents is genetically related to the child. In other situations, a post-birth adoption may be needed to establish legal parental rights for intended parents in Oregon. The birth certificate does include the name of the surrogate in Oregon, but Oregon law allows this to be changed really easily. So intended parents can remove her name and add their own regardless of gender. If both intended parents are the same sex, it doesn't hinder this process. So that's where it's the same as like it was in Idaho. It's just Idaho made it really difficult to remove the surrogate.
Oh, okay.
But Oregon makes it like really
super easy, so it's just fine.
Yeah.
And Oregon's maybe a lot more of a liberal state compared to Idaho, so your chances of getting a judge that is going to approve your pre-birth order is far more likely.
Yeah.
And again, like Oregon is one of the most popular states for surrogacy in the US. You have people from all over the world that come here to do surrogacy. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I mean, that was kind of a question that came up, was like, oh, I wonder why Oregon, if like, there's not the same protections as what you would get in California. But
it's going to be a cheaper area probably to do it
comparatively. Yeah.
But it says in all cases, Oregon's vital records will honor a second parent adoption order from another state. So even if you do surrogacy in another state,
Oregon will honor that.
Oregon will honor like whatever. Yeah. Second parent adoption. So
wow.
Pretty lenient, like, but also nothing like in stone. So maybe we can change that. We can be change makers. Tina.
Right?
I can knock on Tina's door, right?
Tina Kotek is the governor of Oregon, by the way.
We should bring this up to your brother.
Yeah.
He'll make it happen.
My brother works in politics.
Yes,
by the way. All these inside things that nobody knows about. And like, oh, here's a piece of info. Here's a piece of info.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, God. Okay. Well, speaking of politics, let's get into this Georgia Meloni business and what is going on in Italy. This is going to be a conversation on this far-right nationalistic conservative movement that's going through Europe, specifically the recent news that's been all around Italy and how that's affected LGBTQ plus families everywhere. So let's get into it. Okay, to start with, in the past, some local mayors and city councils have granted birth certificates to same-sex couples, listing both of them as parents, but this practice stopped earlier this year by order of Prime Minister Georgia Meloni.
Local prosecutors are now moving to change those birth certificates to reflect only one mother. This is specifically happening in a northern city called Padua. Is that right?
Yeah, Padua.
And they started removing the names of non-biological gay mothers from their children's birth certificates under new legislation passed by the traditional family first government.
Okay, hold up.
Okay.
Wait. So you're saying not only have they changed the law to not grant any more birth certificates to same-sex couples.
They're like removing people from birth certificates that their names are on.
Removing?
Yeah. They went full bore.
So like literally you have families, parents with a kid, with kids,
And they're on the birth certificate right now.
And they're on the birth certificate, and the government is taking these birth certificates back and removing one of the parents from the birth certificate.
Yeah.
What?
I know. So super, super, super sad.
And I just want to like emphasize, because it's not only just a piece of paper, like a sentimental piece of paper. It's also like the right. So we were talking about the right, being able to visit your child in the hospital,
make decisions about school, pick them up from school, like
even pick them up from school.
Well, I think it's like, it's sort of like a guardianship thing, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's like if I drop my kid off at school and I say that this other person's going to pick them up, like I, as the parent, have to delineate that. So if you're not the parent, the parent has to give you permission, right? So if you're not on their birth certificate and you're not considered their parent, your spouse is going to have to tell the school, this person's okay to pick them up. You know what I mean? It's really bizarre. Luckily, this has been sort of isolated from what I've seen to like 1 or 2 or 3 cities, because it's weirdly like up to the city to issue these birth certificates and sign these birth certificates. So like the mayor of Rome has come out like strongly against this and has even continued to like sign people's birth certificates with same-sex couples as both parents. So it's an interesting thing. Like in the US, it would be states probably making these decisions, not cities. But here it's like everything's controlled by city, which like how many thousands of cities are in Italy?
Or like a city regional area. Right.
Yeah. So very, very, very wild. To note, Italy doesn't allow same-sex marriage. They don't recognize same-sex marriages.
But they do recognize same-sex civil unions since the year 2016.
Yeah. So also problematic when you're trying to establish parental rights if you can't be legally married.
Another thing is that Italy doesn't allow LGBTQ plus couples to fully adopt, or they don't allow adoption rights in Italy. And this is also in part because surrogate pregnancy is also illegal in the country. So you can't do surrogacy in Italy. You can't adopt in Italy if you're an LGBTQ plus couple.
What? Is that confirmed?
If you're a gay couple in Italy, you can't adopt.
Wow. But get this, fostering is open to unmarried couples, single people, and the LGBTQ community.
LGBTQ plus people can foster a child, can like
take care of a child with the highest needs
children in the country,
but they can't adopt,
and they can't be granted the rights to parenthood.
Wow.
To be a child's parent.
That's so sad. I think when we think of Europe, we usually think of them being like more forward thinking,
like
on
super progressive, on the cutting edge
social
of things.
issues.
Yeah.
Not the case. Wow. Okay, so all of this is sort of trickling in from this far right government. This woman named Georgia Meloni, who I don't want to give like too much time to, but let's just figure out who she is. She joined something called the Italian Social Movement, which was like a right-wing party founded by supporters of Benito Mussolini, who, if you know anything about...
Oh, the fascist.
Bad guy, fascist.
Yeah, World War II.
We don't like him.
Do we remember that?
She was big fan growing up. So fast forward to 2019, the Brothers of Italy, which is essentially like a fascist leaning right-wing party.
It's kind of like the party from Benito Mussolini has evolved and changed over time into other political groups. And now this Brothers of Italy, is that what it's called?
Yeah.
Is like one of those groups that have come out from this fascist movement.
Yeah. And they went from like in 2019 getting maybe 6% of the vote in an election to 2022, they got 26% of the vote.
Whoa.
Which in Italy somehow made them the controlling party and put her...
There's a lot of parties.
Put her as, you know, the person in charge of parliament,
Minister.
The prime minister. Yeah. She's running on this very Floridian style family first. It's called God, Family, Fatherland.
That's the name of the
pro-family campaign called God, Family, Fatherland.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
One of the thing that gets me is like one of their biggest pushes for this government is to encourage women to have children.
Right. But I mean, like, okay, yeah, I know it's funny
Because they have a really low birth rate.
right. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think that is kind of where this problem stems from.
Ironic.
Well, it's because yeah, Italy has a really low birth rate. It has the lowest birth rate in Europe.
Lowest in the world.
Lowest in the world.
1.24 per woman is among the lowest in the world. It doesn't say the lowest, but it says among the lowest.
And Italy's population is consistently aging.
Oh, yeah.
So you're getting more and more old people, less and less young people, and the economy is suffering because of that a little bit.
So this is sort of like a thing throughout the world, right? Like this is kind of happening in every country. Old people are a huge swath of the population, and then they stop working and they go on Social Security, and Social Security is being paid by us at the moment. And if there's less of us working and contributing to Social Security, there's not enough money for them to like live.
Right.
And so that's essentially what's happening in France, right? So they're trying to increase the retirement age. It's happening. It's always a topic of conversation in the US. And now it's, I think, becoming more of a top of mind in Italy.
And in Italy, it's,
right?
it's
Because
mostly
it's super old population and not enough
Right.
young people.
And most of the younger women in Italy are taking care of their older parents.
Well, that was one thing that was said is that, you know, besides all of these factors, lack of affordable childcare, low salaries, precarious work contracts, and the tradition of women bearing the burden of caring for older parents, it's like it's not
a very conducive
world
place
to have children.
Yeah. There's not much benefit of having a child other than like
Well, I mean, if you want a family, that's
you
why
want a
you have
family,
a
that's
child.
great.
That's why you have
Yeah.
a child, right? But like economically, you're not benefiting from having a child. Like if the government is just like, you need to have a child, and you're like, I can't afford a child.
you're more like disadvantaged economically.
Yeah. I mean, it's just a really expensive world to have kids in right now. And I don't think that older people understand that. It's not just like, we can't just have like a million kids.
Oh yeah.
Like
we
can't afford it.
We can afford it.
It's just not possible.
I wasn't even connecting that like to us, but like, cause I mean,
yes.
but even in the US, it's the same
yeah.
thing. So okay. Yeah. I guess I'm getting layers of understanding right now.
Well, I mean, and then like people are thinking, oh my gosh, what kind of life can I provide for this child? And costs of everything keep going up, and you have to pay for sports. And then are they going to go to college? How are you going to afford college? Because college tuition and costs keep rising all the time. And millennials are carrying like the most debt of any generation ever. And it's a rough time to just tell people who are in their 20s and 30s to just have more
children.
babies. Like,
but only tell part of the population, like LGBTQ plus people
cannot
have
don't
babies.
You dare have babies.
Don't have babies, but the straight couples, yes, you can have babies in Italy. Pope Francis also stated recently he was encouraging Italians to have more children. He denounced the financial precariousness that is facing a lot of young couples, but he also denounced this selfish, egotistical choice that has led to a record low birth rate and is threatening the country's economic future.
Just like bonkers.
A weird thing to say.
This is a weird thing to say. Like, take no account of the world as it is and just be like, you're selfish for not having kids.
Yeah.
Like, not a good look.
No, that's not.
Also, like, our generation, I think, is probably the most environmentally conscious generation thus far.
Well, I think Gen Z is probably
No, that's what
more.
I'm saying. But like Gen Z are like childbearing at this point. They're in their low 20s.
Yeah.
I mean,
hello,
I know
Gen Z.
I know Gen Z people who have children. People aren't doing great things for the planet. You know what I mean? Like each person has a carbon footprint. Each person creates trash. Like, I think we as a generation don't feel like it's our job to continuously increase the population of the world when we like actively see human activity destroying it. That's a kind of like a factor that might plays into my mind of like, if we could just have kids, if we were a straight couple, we could just have kids. Maybe I wouldn't really think about it as much, but having to put as much thought as we do into having kids, I'm thinking of like, do we really need to like go from 5 billion to 6 billion to 7 billion to 8 to 9 to 10 to 11 to 12 to 13 billion? Like, Is it necessary?
No,
Or is
it's
it
not.
maybe like that's just what's going to happen, is that we can be fine with there being like 7 or 8 billion people, and we don't have to
Well, the
go.
population is going to be self-limiting at some point because there's only so many
Yeah.
resources. But I
don't know.
that's
It's
a whole nother
just,
conversation.
I don't know. I
honestly.
know, but I'm just saying, I think that's maybe in other people's minds if it's in my mind.
Yeah.
Who knows? Maybe not.
Okay, I want to go back to the situation in Italy.
No,
And-
of course.
Yeah, and
I'm thinking of I'm saying like that could be in the minds of some Italians. We were just in Italy. There is like very little land that's not occupied by humans.
yeah,
Like that is a small country with like 60 some million people.
Oh,
It's the
yeah.
size of Oregon. Oregon has like 4 million people.
Holy crap.
I mean, it was so packed.
So Padua.
Padua, what do you want to say?
Well, as of recently, 27 mothers have been removed from 27 birth certificates.
This is true.
So this is like, all right, we're dealing with small numbers here, but this is like a very significant thing.
Slippery slope.
Yeah, and that's kind of why we're talking about it, because it's freaky, it's scary, it's weird, it's unprecedented.
Yeah.
Can I say that?
Yeah. Well, the measure also stops men in same-sex relationships from registering the birth of their child with both fathers' names. Instead, they have to choose one to be the legal father, which then, if you can't adopt as a LGBTQ person in Italy, then you
Cannot have
right? Then you can't.
shared parentage
I don't know.
as a family.
Right?
Yeah.
That's what
It's
I'm
basically
reading.
destroying like the possibility of LGBTQ plus families having a family.
So then if one passes away, right, then there's going to be this lengthy process to try and legally adopt the child. But then if LGBTQ people can't adopt, then how is that even going to be possible?
And like you mentioned before, this affects lots of different rights to the non-registered parent, and it requires them to access or gain permission from the other parent in order to carry out everyday family tasks like picking up the child from school.
But wait, there's more. Her government, Meloni's government, also introduced legislation to extend the national ban on surrogacy to couples who use services abroad.
Whoa.
So anyone breaking the law could face 2-year jail term and a fine of more than $1 million.
So I'm sorry, not only is like surrogacy out, oh my God.
So they're trying to like
just preventing
outlaw surrogacy, you from doing surrogacy
anywhere in
the world.
If you're an Italian
Which,
citizen.
how is that? How can you do that? That's just wild to me. Yeah.
Oh.
That law hasn't been debated in Parliament yet.
But that's kind of like the real possibility of what we're looking at with this government.
But also that affects heterosexual couples.
Right. But it's
It's
disproportionately.
just surrogacy.
Right. But it's
So-
disproportionately affecting
No, totally.
LGBTQ
But
plus couples.
like, if it's just as surrogacy, that could be a heterosexual couple.
Yeah,
If you are
absolutely.
having trouble getting pregnant, like, sorry, you can't do surrogacy abroad.
You can't do surrogacy, period.
You can't do surrogacy, period. No, totally. Justin Trudeau like spoke out against this, which I thought was very nice of him to do. We love Justin Trudeau. At the G7 summit, he said Canada is concerned about some of the positions Italy is taking in terms of LGBTQ rights, and to which Georgia Meloni looked really uncomfortable, I guess. So, which she should. That's just some bonkers, crazy stuff that happens when you let crazy, radical, right-wing political leaders start running things. And we actually got in touch with one of the couples. One of the parents was removed from the birth certificate. And
From Padua.
And we did an interview with them to just kind of like go through their experience and like what the heck is happening, you know, like what are their options moving forward, how does this change their life, et cetera, et cetera. So
We really wanted to hear, the perspective of somebody that this is truly affecting.
yeah, so we were super happy that they
We're willing
let
to
us
come on and share their knowledge.
We are talking to Michela and Viola in Italy. And this is a couple that has actually been in the news because one of them was removed from the birth certificate of their child, which is obviously very devastating. And we are so lucky to have Giacomo and Sydney here helping us translate. So we were just going to kind of ask them about their experience and like what's been going on and just all this news that has just kind of cropped up in Italy recently. So, one, welcome to our podcast. Thank you so much for being here. And if you guys just want to give a little introduction of yourselves, that would be great.
I'm Michela. She's my wife, Viola. We formed a civil union a couple years ago. We were supposed to do it during the pandemic, but we did it right after the lockdown. We decided to start a family. And because of this, with everything that's happening in Italy, after our daughter Giulia was born, we landed on many newspapers because our daughter was born with two mothers, but at a certain point in her life, when she was 9 months old, one mom was removed from her life.
I'm curious because there were multiple women like removed from birth certificates. So you're not the only ones that were two women on a birth certificate, correct? Like, did you know other people that had done this?
We are not the only ones. After the election of Georgia Meloni and the letter from Minister Piantedosi that instructed mayors to stop transcribing birth certificates, we were the first or second couple to be removed from the birth certificates. So the first or second family to be removed in January 2023. The cancellation was very, very fast. We went to court and our daughter had a mother removed from her birth certificate at the beginning of April. We were the first family for whom this process was retroactive because they did not stop Giulia from having two mothers recognized. Giulia had two mothers, but one was canceled later on. Now there are other certificates that the courts are considering. There are 33 or 34 in Padova. So unfortunately, we're definitely not the only ones.
Yeah, because they're in, is it Bergamo?
Padua.
No, but I think are they in Padua or are they in Bergamo?
Bergamo?
Yeah, so they're in Bergamo.
Bergamo started doing it before Padova.
Oh my God, really? Oh, wow.
Wow.
Padua is like the one that's
in the news.
It's in the news. It's like 27. And then I think them and Bergamo is like, I think maybe a few, but I guess I don't know the numbers.
What's the legal reasoning that
like, what do they
citing?
say?
Yeah, what are they saying?
What are they telling you?
How are they justifying it?
That like this birth certificate is invalid. Like, how is that possible?
Like, now I do not want to use inappropriate language since it's legal language, but when we went to court with our lawyer, we decided not only to defend our daughter's birth certificate, but to try to take this matter to the Constitutional Court. So we were told that there was nothing unconstitutional in what was happening, and that, I'm going to rephrase it here, there cannot exist a family with two mothers. The family is made up of a mother and a father. A family has a mother and a father. We were two mothers. Two mothers cannot exist. There's only one mother, and that's Viola.
But the solution they proposed was adoption. They told us not to despair because a solution existed, stepchild adoption, which, truth be told, is not really a solution, but just a patch.
At the end of the day, they told us there's nothing unconstitutional, and a family can be considered as such only if there's a father and a mother. And in the documents, stepchild adoption was indicated as a possible solution.
I'm just going to add one thing. We made this attempt. We went to the Constitutional Court with the lawyer, not only to defend ourselves, but also because the judge of the Constitutional Court 2 years ago said it was necessary to legislate on the subject, because there is no law in Italy that talks about birth certificate transcriptions of family with same-sex parents. There is nothing, so a law is needed. The judge of the Constitutional Court said it.
The judge asked the parliament to legislate on the subject. It's been several years and nothing has been done, and there's an important normative void in Italy. In the documents, the court, in their final ruling, tells the city of Bergamo to cancel my name from our daughter's birth certificate because a family cannot be made of two mothers. Giulia has a mother, that's Viola, and I am Viola's partner, but I'm not Giulia's mother. Giulia has one mother. That's Italy's stance on it.
So how did this affect your family, and what are the implications to this decision being
What are the
passed?
practical implications? Like, if something happens to the biological parent, right, and then what happens to the child if this step parent adoption doesn't go through, or she's still removed off the birth certificate? Is it like she's not the mom at all, or like how does it affect them?
If something happens to Giulia, in the most positive of the hypotheses, she is giving to her grandparents, Viola's parents, and in the worst case, she would be put up for adoption. I have no saying today legally in Giulia's life, but I do pay for her essential services. This is something that I always emphasize because if I have no right or responsibility, actually, so I could say today, I'm just leaving. Goodbye, everybody. I have no responsibility, which is terrible. I have no right. So I can't. Well, I couldn't. I'm going to use could because it's not like that. I couldn't take her to the doctor. I couldn't pick her up from daycare. But actually, I do take her to the doctor and I do pick her up from daycare. I do pay for the essential services because Viola and I are considered as a unit by the government because we live in the same house. And because of our civil union, our income is combined. Viola is not considered as a single mother when it comes to paying for daycare or to paying for all other basic services for Giulia. Our income is combined. This is another important paradox that families like ours are living in Italy. I cannot take advantage of any of the benefits. For example, at work, I didn't have the right to maternity leave. I don't have right to taking time off when Giulia is sick. I use PTO days because I can do it, but I do not have a right to anything. We already started the path of stepchild adoption precisely because these things I'm telling you are very serious and difficult to manage in everyday life. Funny, ironic thing is that they are considered as a family for tax purposes. So they are taxed as if they were a family. And Viola is not a single parent, a single mother. Because if you are a single mother, then you have like a discount on like daycare or services.
Oh my God.
They are paying taxes as a family, but they're not getting like the benefits of
I'm
being
so
a family.
mad.
So they're getting
They're being taxed like a family, but they're not
Treated
given
like a
the
family.
rights as a family.
But their rights are not those of a family.
Okay, so we don't want to take too much of your time. This has been like mind-boggling and very eye-opening. But is there anything else that you want to say about just the situation, or like your experience in Italy, or anything that we didn't touch on yet that feels important to share?
It's important that you keep talking about it, especially abroad. Since we started talking about this in some foreign newspapers, others have come. This is a picture of Italy that is very different from the one you would imagine an Italy in 2023 that prevents functional families like ours that are full of love to cultivate a healthy relationship and a healthy family. It is something to tell outside our borders because things can slowly change. And because children like Giulia and families like ours should not go through all this that we're going through. I will adopt Giulia as they suggested, not because I think that I have to adopt my daughter, because she is my daughter. She was born from the great love between me and Viola and from a donation. But I hope that nobody will have to go through the things we are going through in the future because it's a pain that cannot be described. We are happy about this, but very tired, but very happy. We're tired because we have a job, as well as what's our main job, which is our family. We have to dedicate time to our family, to our jobs, and everything else we have to do is extra, like being on social media, telling our story, having created a small community of almost 10,000 people who love and support us, but above all, talking to newspapers, which is not easy for us, but we decided to do it because we really don't want any other child, no other family to go through what we are going through because it's absurd in 2023 in a democratic country in Europe.
We also interviewed our friends Giacomo and Sydney. Giacomo is from Italy. They now live in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. However, we wanted to get Giacomo's input on kind of like how these changes of law affect him. And, they've considered moving back to Italy, and they've been having this, I spoke to them recently, and they've been having this discussion on kind of the factors that they're considering as far as like what's changing in the US, what's changing in Europe, what's changing in Italy, how is that going to affect them and their ability to have a family in the future. So this is another great point and a good conversation to have right now, is lots of people are having the same conversation around the world. So to follow up with all this, we do have Sydney and Giacomo. They are a couple that live in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And I was actually talking to them recently about like surrogacy, adoption, kind of like family building options, because they're a gay couple looking at building their family. But Giacomo is from Italy.
He's an Italian citizen.
Yes. And so we were talking about kind of like that and what's going on in Italy right now and how that's affecting their decisions, because I think Sydney and Giacomo were saying, you guys were saying your interest in maybe relocating back to Italy at some point. And so I don't know, take it away from there.
Which
like,
I take
what?
as a personal insult.
I don't
that you would move further away.
Oh, well, if you guys move further away, yeah, but I mean, Italy,
yes,
nice place to be.
I mean, the food's pretty good.
Yeah.
It's good.
Well, thank you for having us, first off.
Oh, of course.
Thank you for being here.
Giacomo helped translate that entire conversation with the couple from Italy. So thank you. Grazie mille for that.
Grazie.
But yes, go ahead and just kind of talk a little bit about kind of what your thoughts are, essentially. Like, we want to grow a family. Italy's kind of being weird right now, but like it might be a kind of a great place to live. Like it's your where you grew up. There's a lot of great food. There's a lot of reasons that you might want to live in Italy, but then there's also a lot of reasons why you may not. So I don't know, walk us through that like thought process.
Everything you said is very, very true. Obviously, like being close to family, if you want to start a family, like original family, is definitely helpful, and for all the support, practical and also like moral. But yeah, the situation right now in Italy is not the most ideal for same-sex couples wanting to start a family. So I definitely think that because of that, even if we wanted to move back to Italy, like right now, we wouldn't.
Right.
The landscape needs to change to what it currently is, because like right now I'm an American citizen, he's an Italian citizen. So
talking about, what would that look like in terms of if we were to move there, if things, decline in this country. Well, at least we thought at first we have an option to leave, or we have an option to go to his country. But then the question comes into place of, at that time, let's just role play into the future. Am I going to be an Italian citizen, or am I not going to be one? Right. And if so, who's going to be the registered parent of the child?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And then you're thinking, I mean,
even
you're
with
still
family
not sure.
building options in general, like if you were to move to Italy and choose that you want to adopt or you want to grow your family via surrogacy, how we're considering the current political climate and what's changed, like how does that affect your family building process?
If we move back to Italy, it would have to be after we start a family, because I think building a family here is not easy, as you guys explore in your podcast.
Correct.
But
there's an end goal. You can do it.
Yeah, it's a possibility at least. While in Italy, it seems like they're kind of like doing everything they can to make it impossible.
Like putting up more and more barriers to make it more difficult for...
Well, like Michela and Viola were saying, like there's just no law supporting two moms, right? Whereas in the U.S., there are states with written law that supports two same-sex parents, right? It's written down somewhere in the United States, in multiple states. Not all of the states, but multiple states.
Right.
And also, we have legal marriage, right? So, but and Italy does not. And so I think, as much as we think about our situation in the U.S., sometimes we have at least those protections, which you would essentially be kind of throwing up into the air, right? If you ended up going.
Yeah. And to make it even more complicated in Italy, there are rules that apply to two moms, but not to two dads. And so like, I was reading that like two men together is considered like more severe and more dangerous than two women together. What? So that's why two women together, they can do more than what two men can legally do.
Really?
Yeah, it's very confusing. And as bizarre. You said, the law is not clear. There's the courts. One court says something, and then the other court says the opposite. And it's a big mess, and nobody knows what to do.
I don't think I've ever had a time in my life where I've heard the word court so many times. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm realizing how much of our lives just depend on someone who has a law degree making a decision, which blows my mind. Like, I've never had so many court decisions in my life in like a 2-year span. Yeah. Where I'm like, holy cow, I should have just been a lawyer, because like then I just get to decide what happens in the world. Like, it's just that's crazy.
I don't think anyone's saying, "Oh, I should have just been a lawyer."
Well, no, but like, I mean, if it's like,
sorry,
am I a legitimate human or am I not? Like, judge, please decide. Please decide my legitimacy as a human or as a parent or whatever. Like, if I were a gay kid in high school, I would be like, yeah, I'm gonna be a lawyer, I'm gonna fight this.
Yeah, I've never woken up and been like, I should have gotten a law degree.
I think it's just the influence behind it. I didn't realize the influence behind it. It's wild.
We were when we were having this conversation, because it opens up so many different levels. I said to Giacomo last night, I was like, well, what if you got a job in France? Because when you're an EU citizen, right, we can go anywhere. So I was like, well, Italy, maybe they won't accept us. So why not go to like Spain or France, somewhere more progressive? And you told me that we would still have the problem of Italy would still have to approve what we're doing. So it still connects back to Italy because of his citizenship.
It's kind of like, and again, this is my understanding. I think it's correct, but I'm not a lawyer. But I can, as an EU citizen, I can live and work in any country in the EU without a visa. Right. And Sydney could too, because our civil union is registered in Italy. Mm-hmm. But so he was saying,
we're going to France.
What if you get a job in a country that is not Italy, that allows adoption and all that, wouldn't that work? And I think it wouldn't, because as an Italian citizen, all the bureaucracy needs to go through Italy. So like, I'm not going to get a French passport. I'm not going to get, like, I cannot get a French passport because I'm not a French citizen. So I need to go through Italy for.
Well, they had their child in Spain, right? So and
they had the child. I think they had the child in Italy.
okay, but they did the
the IVF
fertility stuff in Spain. Okay. Okay. Well, yeah, that would be complicated. Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess it's long-term family planning. At the end of the day.
Yeah.
That dual citizenship or not.
Do you have it sounds like you have a pretty strong draw to want to go back to Italy. Is that because of the amount of family that you have there?
I don't. Well, in the foreseeable future, I don't see us moving back to Europe.
Yeah.
I do like the idea of always having the option.
Yeah.
To do it.
I'm very jealous of that option.
Yeah. And that's why I want my children to be Italian citizens, because this way they'll have the option to do whatever they want, wherever they want it to do it.
Yeah.
So more just the opportunity. That's what I'm more drawn to.
Can they be dual citizens rather easily if you guys are registered in the US and then?
Yeah, with Italy and American citizenship, they are compatible. Not all countries allow it. Like I know India doesn't allow it, but or China, but Italy does, and US.
Okay, and then just to round out, what do you hope to see changed in Italy?
Maybe gay marriage would be nice because that would open the door to families and
totally
opportunity.
I think, in a nutshell, that same-sex couples could be treated the same way as not same-sex couples, like heterosexual couples are. I think that's the ultimate goal. We don't want more, just want the same.
Literally. I think it's interesting when legalizing marriage equality in the US became this personal thing for people who hold certain religious beliefs, and it's it's not about that. I didn't decide that marriage meant I could go visit him in the hospital if he's dying or whatever, it's I didn't decide that. That's not in a religious text of marriage means you can do this, marriage means you can do that, all the legal stuff. It's I'm not trying to diminish any of your religious beliefs. Somebody decided that marriage means all these legal things, and I would like to be protected. It's we want the legal protections. You can have
the same protections.
You can have your view of what marriage means from a religious standpoint. I just want the legal part of it to be protected and legitimized as a human. So yeah, exactly. It's
you brought up a good point yesterday about the kids too. It's just all these things are hurting the children at the end of the day.
I know.
Yeah.
Which they claim they want to protect.
Right.
Protect the children. We want to protect the children. Well, don't delegitimize their family. I don't know.
Right.
It's just
put them in foster care or something.
I know. Yeah.
Sad, but.
Well, thank you guys so much for joining us and for sharing.
Translating.
Yeah, and for translating.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Of course. Anytime.
Yes.
Yeah. I thought of a master plan before we sign off. Okay, you ready?
Yes, so I'm ready for the master plan.
2025, I'll get my citizenship.
Okay.
Then we'll get divorced. You guys get divorced. Then we'll get married separately. Then we'll give you our citizenship.
Oh, this is
and then
so
we'll all be
perfect.
European citizens, then get remarried back to each other.
Oh my God.
Wow.
I'm very happy with that.
I mean, yeah.
Don't tell the governments.
I'm sure TLC could make a show around that.
International husband swap.
Yeah.
TLC coming to
90-day dual citizenship.
Right.
Yes.
While in America.
Oh my gosh.
We know the secret now.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I'll keep you
TLC
posted in
is listening.
2025.
Perfect.
I am thankful that we have the ability to do surrogacy in the US, that we live here.
Yeah.
And I do feel I don't know, relieved in a sense after talking about this and researching it more and seeing like how difficult it is in other places. And I hope that, you know, LGBTQ plus people everywhere can have more access to having a family, building a family.
This is like kind of
It's a weird thing. And knowledge is power. And now you have the knowledge of where the best places to do surrogacy
Yeah.
are in the US and in the world.
where to avoid.
And where to avoid.
Yes.
With that, we would love to hear your thoughts on this. Like, what do you
Mhm.
think about the current situation in Italy? What are your thoughts on like doing surrogacy within the US and other places? You can email us at who'syourdaddypod@gmail.com. You can send us a message on Instagram at Michael and Matt.
And we haven't done this yet. I don't think we've read a review yet.
Let's read a
right?
review. We're going to start doing this. So please leave us a review, leave your comments, leave your questions, and we will start reading these at the end of every episode.
Okay, here we go. Code _223509 says, I am so excited for this. You both are going to be helping a lot of people with this podcast. My husband and I will be starting our journey next year. So I look forward to having some insight on the process. Much love.
Congratulations. That's
Congratulations.
awesome.
Yes,
Yeah.
I hope that this can be somewhat
Helpful.
helpful, insightful, educational.
To check out what we're doing from the day to day, you can follow us on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, all of the places at Michael and Matt.
Make sure you're subscribed, followed here. Make sure you've given a rating, and please write us a sweet, sweet review. We would love it. And until next time,
Daddy's
Daddy's out.